Welcome to Elselah Books Podcast. You know, if you're like most people, when you hear the phrase church history, you probably imagine an extremely dusty textbook.
Yeah.
Just full of names and dates and doctrinal disputes that feel completely disconnected from your life right now.
And that feeling of irrelevance, that's exactly the mindset our source material is really designed to just demolish. Our mission today is to go beyond the academic facts and really prove why studying our spiritual past isn't just optional. It's a spiritual necessity. We're looking at sources that argue history offers you this profound emotional connection and, maybe more importantly, spiritual protection.
Protection. I love that word here. It frames this entire deep dive, doesn't it? We're talking about spiritual guardrail.
That's the
The
exact.
kind of, established historical understanding that keeps us safe from, modern intellectual accidents.
Precisely. If you're going to navigate the complexities of faith and life, you need those guardrails. They're what keep you from veering off into theological error or, as the source material puts it, into outright heresy. The scope of what we're studying today is what our sources call our spiritual family tree. It's a history that tracks the formation, deformation, and reformation of the church.
So let's start at the roots of that tree. When we talk about lineage, people often assume it's a vague sort of mythological claim.
Right.
But the sources we have, they show a direct, personal, and measurable chain of discipleship that started with the apostles.
What's so fascinating here is how tangible that chain of command really is. We're not guessing. We have documented links. The source material highlights this critical succession. Just imagine the apostle, the last living apostle, personally training and discipling a man named Ignatius.
That's such a powerful connection right there, the direct handoff from that first generation.
Absolutely. And Ignatius, in turn, he discipled a man named Polycarp, who became one of the most revered martyrs of the early church. Then Polycarp continued that chain by discipling Irenaeus. So that chain, John, to Ignatius, to Polycarp, to Irenaeus, it shows a documented commitment to preserving and passing on the exact truth they received. It's not a game of telephone. It's, deliberate preservation.
And it stretches even further back, doesn't it? You mentioned Clement of Rome earlier.
Yes. His writings have survived, which gives us this incredible window into the church just after the apostles died. And it's widely believed that this Clement is the same Clement that Paul mentions in Philippians.
Wow.
When you see these names, you realize you're not practicing some newly invented flimsy faith. You're standing on a bedrock of history.
But if history gives us guardrails, it also shows us where the roads were most dangerous. We need to know the threats that past generations had to navigate.
Exactly, so we can spot their modern equivalents.
What were the core foundational battles?
This is where that protection aspect really kicks in. The source material highlights 4 major ancient heresies, existential threats to the early church. And we need to study them not just to know the names, but to recognize the core doctrine they were attacking.
Well, let's run through them. What was the central truth each one distorted?
First up, you had Gnosticism. Their core error was attacking the humanity of Christ. They believed the material world was evil and only the spiritual was good, so they just couldn't conceive that God could take on a real physical body.
So they essentially tried to turn Jesus into a ghost or an illusion.
Pretty much. Which, of course, undermines the reality of the crucifixion and the resurrection.
Yeah, that's foundational.
Absolutely. Second, you had Marcionism. Marcion tried to just chop the Old Testament away from the New. He claimed the God of the Old Testament was, inferior or even evil compared to the loving God of Jesus.
We see echoes of that today, right? This urge to discard any part of the Bible that seems harsh or difficult.
It's the same spirit. And the third major threat, that would be Arianism. This was maybe the longest, most bitter fight. Arius taught that Christ was created by God the Father, a super being, maybe, but not eternally God himself.
Which challenges the absolute divinity of Christ. If Jesus isn't fully God, then the whole basis for salvation just collapses.
It does. And the fourth one was Pelagianism. This heresy was the ultimate challenge to grace. Pelagius argued that man could, through sheer willpower and effort, achieve perfection and salvation without God's grace.
What's sobering is that you can still hear echoes of all 4 of those ancient errors today. It really underscores why we need to pay attention to this stuff.
It does, which brings us to reason 1. Ancient Christianity is a historical faith, not a progressive religion. This is a crucial distinction. When a ministry tries to reinvent itself or preaches a theology disconnected from those ancient roots, it ceases to be the religion of the apostles.
It becomes, as our sources state, an altogether different religion, because it loses its grounding in verifiable historical facts.
Exactly. Church history isn't a collection of nice stories. It bears witness to things that actually happened. Jesus really lived, he died, he rose again. History provides the factual context that keeps the story of redemption from just floating away into fiction.
That's the guardrail analogy again. I mean, we can appreciate a story like The Hobbit. It's got heroism, it's compelling, but we'd never confuse Bilbo Baggins with a historical figure who demands our complete allegiance.
And the danger, according to our sources, is when we start treating the foundational facts of Christianity like they're merely allegorical. History proves the authenticity. That's why the emotional connection matters so much.
It makes us ask, who do we really see as heroes? It's easy to feel emotion for the, I don't know, the impulsively brave action star on screen. But who do we look to when the stakes are eternal?
We have to align ourselves with those who suffered and died for the truth we hold, which leads us straight to reason 2. We must learn to value the Bible as a truth worth dying for. The sources define church history as, fundamentally, a battle for the Bible. It's a 2,000-year conflict.
And the history of that battle is just filled with unbelievable sacrifice. I mean, when we read the Apostle Paul's story, it's not just a nice biography.
Not at all. It's historical documentation of a man who suffered unimaginable things for the integrity of the message. Think about Paul's final journey to Jerusalem. He knew, he was explicitly warned that arrest and imprisonment were waiting for him. And he went anyway, eagerly.
Or that raw account of him being stoned and left for dead. I think we often just gloss over that, but just stop and picture it. A mob pelts him with rocks until he's motionless. They assume he's dead, leave his body in the street.
And yet the source materials tell us he got up and the very next day he went to the next town to preach. It speaks to a commitment to truth that, it just transcends physical pain. We are reading the exact same truth that our spiritual ancestors were thrown to wild beasts or burned at the stake for.
When you look at that level of historical sacrifice, the conclusion is just overwhelming. They place the absolute highest value in life on scriptural truth. We have to ask ourselves, are we demonstrating that same priority today?
And that contrast brings us to the third powerful reason for this deep dive. And this is where it gets really personal. Reason 3. Ancient biblical theology is a necessity for life and holiness.
When people hear the word theology, they often just zone out. They think it's for academics or pastors.
That's the most damaging misconception. The great aha moment here is that every single person listening right now is, by definition, a theologian. Whether you realize it or not, you are constantly engaged in the study of God and how he relates to the world.
You can't avoid it. Everyone has an opinion about who God is, if he exists, what happens after death. That opinion is your theology. So the question isn't if you're a theologian, but are you a good one?
Exactly. And to be a good one, we have to know the theology of Jesus, the apostles, and the early church fathers who fought those battles. And to know that, you have to know history.
And this knowledge, it forms the core of your whole existence, your worldview. Our sources draw this very stark contrast here. The Apostle Paul had a coherent, historically grounded worldview based on Jesus. Hitler also had a worldview.
And the difference in their theological foundations determined the trajectory of world history. It's the difference between building a civilization on redemption or on hatred. Theology is the most practical subject in the world. History helps us identify the spirit of those old, dangerous ideas so we can insulate ourselves.
So, understanding history helps protect our worldview. That leads right into reason 4, doesn't it? We must see ourselves as part of the unbroken body of believers that Jesus started 2 millennia ago.
Jesus made a massive promise in Matthew 16, saying, "I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it." That promise isn't for a single generation. It's a historical truth in action. We are part of that structure he's been building for 2,000 years.
The profound realization here, driven home by the source material, is that we are not the first Christians, which means we are not responsible for being the architects of doctrine. We don't get to innovate the fundamentals.
Right. Think of it like a river. We're just a short section of a massive flowing river of faith that stretches from Eden all the way to the New Jerusalem. Our role isn't to redirect the river. Our role is to proclaim the eternal doctrine that was established long ago.
There's a lot of freedom in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
Our spiritual identity isn't based on creating something new and trendy, but on faithfully transmitting a lineage that is unstoppable.
And that connection to history directly combats the final core argument we found, which is reason 5. We need to see how the gospel is God's unchanging, timeless power.
We hear the argument all the time today. The gospel is archaic, it's outdated, it's irrelevant to our modern, text-saturated world.
And church history just completely annihilates that argument. It proves that the gospel of Jesus Christ is the power of God to save anybody, regardless of their culture, their background, or the century they live in. The gospel was effective in the Roman Empire, it was effective during the Dark Ages, and it is effective today. It is perfectly timeless.
And why is it so universally powerful? Because the sources identify the two concepts that are eternally the most relevant to humanity.
Yes. First, the offer of forgiveness offered to man by God himself. This solves the universal problem of guilt. And second, being loved and favored enough to be saved after death. This solves the universal problem of death.
These are the two biggest questions every single human being has to answer. Therefore, established theology isn't some academic hobby. It's the most relevant knowledge for modern man, essential for life and for death.
The deep dive is complete. We've established the why of history. It gives us our lineage, it installs those guardrails against ancient errors, it gives us real heroes to emulate, and it proves the timeless relevance of our faith.
So what does this foundation mean for what we study next? The sources we looked at, they point us toward the absolute bedrock of the faith. History gives us the confidence to trust the foundations, directing us to explore the messianic prophecies that established the hope of Christ all the way back with Moses and the prophets.
So I'd encourage you to just consider your own theology. How much do you really understand your spiritual lineage? And how much are your beliefs rooted in the historical faith that men and women died for? Thank you for listening, and do subscribe to our channel for more.